Welcome to the Information Security Forum videocast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and today we're featuring ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin in conversation with Misha Glenny, an award-winning writer, broadcaster, and sought-after keynote speaker. His best-selling nonfiction book, McMafia, about the globalization of organized crime, has been adapted as a fictional TV drama series. In this interview, Misha discusses the evolution of cybercrime, the importance of communication throughout an enterprise, the Internet of Things, and more.
So, Misha, thanks very much for coming along. The first thing I wanted to ask you was about cybercrime, organised crime in particular. Is there anything really new about organised crime today versus, say, the pre-digital era?
That difference has emerged, I would say, primarily in the last 5 to 10 years, in as much that when digital came along, it operated in parallel with traditional organized crime. So the reason for that is that in traditional organized crime, if you're a mafia operation, the sine qua non, the thing you have to have in order to operate in the field, is the ability to deploy or to credibly threaten violence. That is a defining characteristic of mafia-style organizations. Cybercrime, when it came along, was entirely revolutionary because it dispensed with the need for violence. So, for example, you could be sitting in Almaty in Kazakhstan, launching an attack against somebody in LA and cashing out your winnings, as it were, in Dubai. And so in that situation, there's no need for a virtual baseball bat. And what that meant is that when cybercrime first emerged as a serious problem in the late 1990s, early 2000s, is that it existed in parallel because it was attracting an entirely different type of person to it. They tended to be younger, they tended often to be quite middle class, they tended often to be educated. Sometimes there's a certain pattern of people with spectrum disorders sometimes attracted to this. And this is very, very different from the Godfather-style operation or the Russian Mafia-style operation you get elsewhere. So they went along merrily without meeting up until about 5 to 7 years ago, when in traditional organized crime, you got a generation coming through to leadership positions who were digital natives. And they wanted to use cyber creatively in order to enhance what they were doing. And that was when we saw the beginning of what is referred to as the digitalization of organized crime, where the two parallel strands started coming together. And now, organized crime is not quite unrecognizable, but it's in a very different place than it was 20, 25 years ago.
So from a law enforcement perspective, I mean, you've mentioned a number of things that it seems to me would make it quite difficult for law enforcement to really deal with that. Certainly, how do they go about tracking down the cyber criminal? How do they go about collaborating across borders? What is the law enforcement response to that?
Law enforcement started to realize in the early 2000s that this was going to be a problem, and they started recruiting people who had digital skills, people who had hacking skills, but they have been somewhat overwhelmed by it. And the reason for this is complex, although it can be broken down. It's, first of all, the public continues to demand security as represented by the bobby on the beat or the cop on the street. And the unfortunate thing about tackling cybercrime is it is very labor and very cost intensive. And so law enforcement agencies have had to shift away from what one could broadly call community policing over to cyber. And so they've had to resist the public when it comes to that. And then after 2008, and austerity policies were introduced everywhere, it was extremely difficult for law enforcement to recruit because their budgets were being pulled back, although often there was an injection into cyber defenses. But then the other thing is that of course, there is a dearth everywhere of cybersecurity engineers. Right. And law enforcement, just like the military or intelligence agencies, cannot compete with the private sector when it comes to salary and benefits and so on. So frequently you will see, for example, in GCHQ in the United Kingdom, Britain's digital spy agency, that they will train people up to be very good forensic investigators, and then in swoops a private sector company and offers them 5 times the salary, and they're gone. So the state is training up that capacity, then losing it to the private sector. So if you go down Silicon Valley, as I have done, and speak to the information security officers of Google, of McAfee, of Yahoo, whoever it is, you will find that they are all either ex-FBI, ex-Secret Service, ex-Defense Intelligence, or ex-CIA. And the United States suffers from the same thing. That does mean, of course, that you do have personal connection between the big digital companies and Washington, but it's still pretty tough on a state if what you're trying to do is to police this area, but with very few resources.
So you make a very, very valid point there that government is effectively training up resource for the private sector. So does that mean that businesses are maturing as quickly as, say, cyber criminals?
It depends. It's partly luck of the draw whether you get good information security officers. The other thing that the businesses have to do, and this is something I go around Britain in particular, talking to companies and talking to their board. And one of the things that I like to stress is that you need to have your information security department, your risk management, your finance department, and very importantly, your communications department across everything that is going on in information security. And the reason for that is that you need to have those silos communicating in such a way that they can present to the board in a way that the board understands. This is why comms is so important. And those people who have sort of looked at the problem of information security creatively and ensured that the key members of staff are properly educated and not just box-ticking educated. There's a lot of box-ticking that goes on. Those are the ones who will tend to anticipate problems before they happen, but also absolutely critically, and again, communications is vital here, is that when a breach takes place, they know how to respond, both in terms of resilience of the operation and in terms of who goes and steps in front of the cameras, Channel 4, BBC, ABC, whoever it is, and puts up a reassuring, convincing explanation of what's happened and what the company is doing to manage the situation.
And there have been some examples of that, haven't there? Of people who've done it particularly well, and those perhaps where there's a need for improvement, shall we say, putting it quite nicely.
There have. I mean, there are some legendary. I think I can talk about Sony quite easily because of the fact that, well, there was a basic lesson that came out of Sony, which should be axiomatic. I mean, I know this is 4 years ago, but it should have been axiomatic 4 years ago. And that is, you do not put material in your emails that you wouldn't be happy seeing on the front of a tabloid the next day. Now, that's got to be axiomatic. And if people haven't learned that basic level about the vulnerabilities that network systems have, then you could almost argue that they shouldn't be in the position that they're in. It is changing, but it's changing very slowly. I'm astonished at how slow it is for people to really pick up and get on board about the risks they run, both to their personal reputation and the reputation of their company.
It's an interesting point, Misha, isn't it? Because, you know, is that because even though we are seeing some very large breaches that obviously capture the headlines, as a proportion of organizations that are out there, there is still perhaps this view in the boardroom that well, is it really going to happen to us? What are the chances of it happening? And how do we get over that one? Because we've talked about awareness, we talked about education, but is there a silver bullet, do you think?
There's not a silver bullet. There's going to be a generational shift, because you still have a lot of board members who see the whole thing as newfangled nonsense and they don't have to worry about it. But that's a temporary problem, and we're transitioning to a different generation now who get it. But I find you can only do it company by company, and you have to explain to people, they have to understand that you have either been hacked, but you don't know it, or you've been hacked and you know it. When I work with my computers, I'm just a sort of one-man band on this, but I never put sensitive material on the web. The interviews that I do with sensitive people in sensitive positions, whatever it is, they live in a digital voice recorder that never goes onto the internet. And I never keep anything or never write anything in emails or keep anything on the computer that if it got out, it would seriously damage what I'm trying to do. So, and you've just got to tell people they're blue in the face. I find that if you've got a good communicator who can translate between information security and the board, then that puts your company in a very strong position.
Because the environment is becoming very much more complicated and complex, isn't it? I mean, we want to be able to access information on mobile devices that are, as we know, not the most secure. There is that human interface element that we know is definitely not particularly secure. And then we get into the business environment itself, where we've got issues around supply chain, Internet of Things. So the challenge for people in boardrooms shouldn't be underestimated.
Yes, and it's shifting all the time. I mean, you mentioned Internet of Things, so that means we go into the area of machine-to-machine learning, which means that everything is moving slightly out of control of human oversight, which is something that concerns me in particular. We've got quantum computing coming down the road in 3-4 years' time, maybe. Some people say it's even closer, and that's going to change the whole environment, because everything that we've had encrypted up until now will be decrypted like that by quantum computers. So that's why I firmly believe that every serious company, it's difficult for small and medium enterprises. It's very difficult for things like charities who have extremely few resources, and yet, who often have data which is very, very valuable to criminals. But the larger companies, if I was running it, a large company, I would have somebody who is coordinating all the time, so that risk management, for example, who are looking at business risks coming down the road and dealing with contemporary issues, contemporary contracts, you will have somebody in risk management who's permanently in contact with information security, and they are discussing a 2 to 3 year threat horizon. And I must say, it's one of the things that I really like about ISF, and I'm not doing this to flatter you, I really do like it. And your threat assessments, what I think is really good is that you always integrate, every year you're integrating political risk, social risk, and technical risk together. Too many threat reports are looking at the narrow issues of what malware is developing in what way, as opposed to what is the context in which it's emerging, and in what context, therefore, may it be used. But you're right. Essentially, you look at the threats now. You've got supply chain. You've got political risk. You've got innovation. There are just so many. You've got the Internet of Things. One of the things that I've been looking at here for ISF is the fact that you're moving to machine as the primary communication channel. And that means that everything you know about threat detection, anomaly detection in user analytics or application analytics, it simply doesn't apply. And hardware is vulnerable. It's very vulnerable. So as we, with huge enthusiasm go into the Internet of Things, as is always the case, security lags behind. And because the Internet of Things implies a massive increase in our dependency as individuals and as a society on network technology, this is a very serious issue, and it should be a matter for broad public debate. It is not.
We've seen some recent legislation, though, haven't we, in California, particularly around building security into devices and so on.
Yeah.
For me, that's a very positive first step.
It is a very positive first step. It doesn't surprise me that it's in California, but I think that has got to be rolled out. But if you notice at the moment, I mean, you and I are both from Britain, and we know what Brexit has done in terms of governance. All the energy of government has been sucked up by this one issue.
Yes.
And so, risks associated with big infrastructural developments in cyber and technology and so on, it doesn't cross the cabinet's desk, and this crisis of governance, which isn't restricted to the United Kingdom, is something that I think, at some point people have got to say, look, part of your role in government is to do what they're doing in California, because what they're doing in California is the right way to go. Now, California is, of course, fortunate because it is the heart of the beast, as it were, it's the belly of the beast. California and the East Coast are obviously critical areas, but we've got to look and learn and see what they're doing in terms of increasing hardware security, because that's the critical thing in Internet of Things. And we've got to invest in it. But of course, I just don't think that at the moment the political atmosphere is conducive to that.
So Misha, thank you very much indeed for coming along and sharing some of those insights. Fascinating as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for tuning into our videocast with Steve Durbin in conversation with Misha Glenny. For more videocasts, podcasts, and other resources for CISOs and anyone looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit securityforum.org. And we'd like to hear from you. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like us to interview, get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.